In the previous section, we learned about how useful the code interpreter, the brand new feature, can be in certain situations, right? It's not going to write you an application or anything, but you can upload files and ask questions about those files and ask for data analysis, data visualization, video processing, all sorts of things. Now we're going to talk about how regular old developers, so this is a section for people who have some technical experience, how regular developers can use ChatGPT on its own, and where it succeeds and excels and where it falls short. When it comes to coding with ChatGPT, I think of it more as an assistant, a helper, a co-pilot. It's what GitHub Copilot essentially is as well, but not as a true developer. Maybe that will happen one day. There are times it surprises me and it's quite impressive, but there are many more times it frustrates me or it provides bad code, incomplete code. It can't figure out how to connect specific libraries. So there are certain tasks it works really well at and other tasks that it definitely falls short. So the first thing you should know is that it just is not good at writing large pieces of code or applications in the same way that it's not good at working with large pieces of text, right? You can't feed it a super long Wikipedia article. It runs out of context. The same is true when it comes to code. So it generally works best when it's writing small self-contained pieces of code, functions, maybe a single file, a module. It can do that pretty reliably, especially if you give it specific requirements and even examples using one or few shot prompting. It is possible to use ChatGPT to write larger pieces of code or even try to use it to write an application for you, but you really have to know what you're doing as a developer and pay attention to what it's writing, because I've trialed this a bunch of times just to see how far I can push it. I've asked it to write games and applications with authentication, and it will give you some good stuff. And then at some point, it just goes off the rails. Or at some point, it forgets what it was doing before because you've written so much text and it's written so much code. So it is not ready at the moment to write you a full application from scratch unless you're doing something super simple. Write me an HTML and CSS Sudoku game. It can do something like that, but it is not ready to write large applications. So on this slide, you can see some of the various tasks color-coded, green, red, and yellow. The green things are things I recommend using ChatGPT for that it does very well at. Write me a function to do X, write me a module that does Y, create a class that does something. It's also really useful for debugging purposes. Please explain what's going wrong in this code. What does this error message mean? I got this weird AWS issue. I don't know how to fix it. Do you have any advice? It does pretty well in those situations, basically as a Stack Overflow clone on steroids. How can you improve this code, this algorithm, this file, the time complexity of this solution? It can do very well in those situations as well, where you're giving it something that's self-contained and asking it to fix it, improve it, critique it. It also does really well translating from one language to another or basically acting as a tutor. So I've been learning more Scala recently, and I frequently use ChatGPT, not just to translate things to Scala, but also to ask questions and ask it, treat it as if it was my Scala tutor, and it can be pretty helpful there. Where it does not do well, as I've already explained, is asking it to write a full-fledged application from scratch. With a caveat, if you're willing to work with it, if you have the technical know-how, if you want to try and coach it along the right path, you can get it to help you with larger pieces of code, but you have to ask very specific pointed questions. You have to be careful about how many tokens have been used in the context window, and you have to be very specific. So asking something like write me a chat application won't get you far. Asking it to help you start a chat application using Express and MySQL might get you started. It will give you something that you could start with, but it's not going to write an entire app for you, and you'll have to keep coming back, asking it follow-up questions, providing more context, reminding it of the code it's already written because it's already forgotten about it a couple minutes later. If you have a lot of stuff in your chat window, it will forget about the earlier stuff. So it takes some work. And this is just based on my experience. It is useful in a lot of situations relating to code, but it is not going to write full things for you, at least not yet. So I'm going to show some examples of how I like to use it, some real world examples in the next few videos. And this is, again, for people who have some technical knowledge. I'll mix it up, do some Python, do some JavaScript. It won't be specific to one language. So if you're a Python dev, don't worry. If you're a JS dev or something else, these are all going to be just pretty generic examples for any language. Next, I have some quick tips and strategies that will help you if you're using ChatGPT as a developer. And the first thing to keep in mind is that it is definitely an iterative process, especially if you're trying to write longer things. I already touched on this in the previous video. It doesn't work very well if you just tell it to write you an application. It works much better if you go slowly. You give it some context at the beginning. I'm trying to build this application. Here's the tools I want to use. Can you write this one piece first? Can you write this one route? Can you create the HTML for this one view? And then you can build it up as you go. And I'm going to show an example of that. But just keep that in mind, that it's not going to spit out something most of the time that is perfect and big. It will spit out perfect in small chunks like shell scripts and functions and standalone pieces. I use it for that all the time, and it usually works pretty well. For bigger things, it's very much try something, it doesn't work, try it again, and repeat process. The next tip is that it's often wrong. It happens a lot. It will generate code. I'll show examples of a time I got an infinite loop in the real world outside the context of making this course. I was working on a project where I was trying to use ChatGPT to help me. It gave me some code that seemed like it worked, and it was a complete infinite loop once I actually started using it to request an API, and I used up a whole lot of API credits, which is my fault, but it is wrong often. The good news is it's also very good at fixing things when it's wrong and you tell it that it's wrong. So one of the videos I have coming up is a very simple demonstration of that. I asked it to build this little animated HTML page where we have a logo bouncing around the screen from corner to corner, kind of like the old DVD screen, if you ever saw that. And it took 3 or 4 attempts of me trying, and it's like 50, maybe 30 lines of code, nothing big. And it was completely buggy, didn't work. It was stuttering. The image wouldn't move. And then I identified the issue and I told it, hey, it's not working. There's a bug and it's just stuttering on the screen, and it immediately fixed it. So I'll show that as a separate video, but just to give you a heads up, it often is wrong, which is not the end of the world if you are aware that it's often wrong, because it is pretty good at fixing code that it writes, especially if you can identify why something doesn't work. And then finally, a really important piece to keep in mind is the context window. Remember that every model, ChatGPT model, has a maximum context window, which is the amount of tokens basically that it can work with in terms of its input and output put together. And if you exceed that, you can run into problems if you're writing large applications or large pieces of code across multiple files, a really long conversation. By the end of that conversation, it often forgets or doesn't know what happened at the beginning, and it starts going off the rails and writing code that doesn't cohere to the rest of the code that it generated for you earlier. So this is something you want to be aware of, especially with longer things. It's true of any long chat that you have with ChatGPT, but I've found that when I'm working with code, those tend to be the longest types of chats that I have, especially with bigger applications. So the model will start to forget about things and generate nonsense. One strategy, aside from just being aware of this, knowing about the context window, knowing that if you get too many tokens, too many words in a chat, it isn't able to process all of them. One specific strategy is to tell ChatGPT to only generate you code and not generate explanations. Because what it often will do is give you here's a function that's 10 lines, and then here's 50 lines of me or the model explaining how the function works, what it does, what the parameters are. And you may not actually need that. It's just extra content that's taking up your tokens. So that is one strategy we'll also employ later when I show you an attempt at building something larger with ChatGPT. And I say attempt because it doesn't work perfectly to build applications. But we'll start off in this section taking a look at some things where it does excel at: writing functions, writing shell scripts, writing small pieces of functionality. That's coming up. So the first use case we'll look at is asking ChatGPT to help us write basic functions. And I'm not talking about, a function to add two things together, although we definitely can do that. But I'll try and show a realistic example. We'll start with a very trivial example, maybe multiplying two numbers together, which is technically not adding them together, but then I'll show something that I actually have used personally. I'm going to try and keep some of this grounded in the real world. It's so much easier as a teacher to just say, write a function that adds two numbers and call it a day. But I do want to show some things that prove that it can be useful in the real world. So I'm drawing from my own personal experience using ChatGPT over the last few months. Okay. So just like with any prompt, we need to give it a little bit of context. We don't really need to say like, you are an expert developer. It's pretty good at writing code. So we can simply say, I need you to write me, let's pick a Python function that expects two numbers and returns the product of the two numbers. I mean, very, very basic. We really don't need ChatGPT to do this, assuming you have some developer experience. Now, this is regular old ChatGPT, not the interpreter. It's giving me the code and showing me how to use it, but then I still, of course, have to run this myself and test it out. And with anything ChatGPT gives us, we definitely want to try it just before incorporating it into any code base. That's a no-brainer, just like you would try any function you find on Stack Overflow. And it does work pretty well in most situations, including really basic functions that, it certainly has come across this exact function in its training data set, but also in novel functions that it maybe has not come across. So something I had to do recently was rename a ton of files. Specifically, I had a bunch of numbered files. They're actually course lectures I had created, and they were in this format where I have a big course, maybe with 100 or 200 lectures, and I number them as I go, 1 and 2, 3, 4. I'm using text files for this demo, but when I actually ran this a couple weeks ago, I had already done this using video files. And I just don't want to mess with them right now. I'll leave my video files alone because they are correctly named. Anyway, what I did, kind of a naive thing for how long I've been making these courses, I normally label my course videos like this. In section 1, I'll have 011.mp4, and then I'll have 012, and those will all be in section 1. And then in section 2, I have 02.01.mp4, for example. And the reason I do it this way is because Udemy has a bulk uploader where I can upload 100 videos at once and then attach them to lectures after I've uploaded. The problem is, if I name my videos like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I have in a separate section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and another section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I cannot figure out which video is which. I'll upload them all, and there'll be like 10 videos, one from each section, that has the name 1, and then another 10 videos from each section that has the name 2. So what I want to do is basically take the folder name, like right here, and rename this lecture to be 4_1. And this one would be 4_2, 4_3. It would be simple enough to do this myself, but I just asked ChatGPT to help me with it. So I basically wrote a prompt that says, I have the following file structure. And then I tried to diagram it here, where I have a folder with the name of 1. And then inside that folder, I have 1.txt, 2.txt, 3.txt. And then I have a folder called 2. And inside of that, I have 1.txt. And I'll just leave it off at 2.txt. And then below that, write me a Python script that I can run to rename all the files in a directory to be prefixed with the number of the directory, maybe the parent directory. Then move all the files into a single new directory called ready to upload or something like that. So I wanted to take this structure and write code that can loop over all of the directories, which I might need to coach it with because it might just assume I only want these two directories. Take the name of each directory and prefix each lecture, each file, with that number. So 2_1, 2_2. So I might even show it the format. The lectures or the files should have names like 1_1.txt and 1_2.txt. So I'll show an example of the end format I want. Let's see what it does. It might need more information. Okay, so it starts by making my directory called ready to upload if it doesn't yet exist. List all the directories in the current working directory. If it is a directory, list all the files. And then perfect, this is exactly what we want. This line right here, if you're not familiar with Python, this is an F string. It interpolates the name of the directory underscore the name of the file, and then it moves them all into this directory. Now let's see. It says you're running it. I assume you're running it in the parent directory of the 1 and 2 directories. That's what I want. So let's try this. I'm going to make a new script in here called, rename files.py. I put the script that it gave me in rename files, so it's in there. And now I'm going to try executing it. And let's see what happens. Okay, it looks like some stuff happened. These directories are now empty, which I did tell it to move them. I could have said make a copy, but I was dealing with video files originally, which were large, like hundreds and hundreds of gigs of video, so I didn't want to do that. And now, instead of ready to upload, perfect. I have 4_x. I have 3_ each one of my lectures, 2_ and so on. It did exactly what I wanted. So I did this in the real world, like I said, but I was using video files, and then I could take this entire folder and upload it all to Udemy at once using the bulk uploader tool, and I didn't have to worry about name collisions, and it was very easy as I went section by section to identify the correct videos once they were uploaded. So just a simple example, but this is the sort of thing that ChatGPT is really useful for in my day-to-day life as a developer. I could write this function. It would just take some time. Why not try something using ChatGPT and save that time?